Hello everyone and welcome to VEDA number 6 for Keith Sheesworth's 2019 VEDA. I really need to standardize that intro. But the talking point of this week is defending the Duke. Now, if you don't know, of course, the original Xbox had 2 standard controllers. It launched with this, the Duke, and it later came out with the Controller S. Now, almost all third-party controllers follow this format, except really early ones, but they're extremely rare. And the Duke gets a really bad rap as a controller. People say it's bulky, clumsy, and just unnecessarily huge. I mean, I think it's the largest standard video game controller. I'm not sure. There might be some video. But, yeah, this is obviously the design that's inspired Xbox going forward. Here's a 360 controller. But I think the Duke gets a bad rap. First of all, although it doesn't mean for much in gameplay, I think it's the most stylish video game controller ever made. You know, it's got this big logo in the front that's kind of just sort of in your face, and like it was obviously meant to be swapped out for various different special editions. In fact, I think actually I've never seen anyone try and customize that. I don't know why. That seems like a given to me, but no matter. The colors on like the all black finish, very nice. Very few other colors you can find this one in. I think you can find it in green and orange, and that's about it. But yeah. Now, a lot of people say it's clumsy. And that, I believe, is down purely to these 4 buttons. Not anything necessarily to do with the size. And actually, before I get into this, I'll go through the good points mechanically as they attribute to games. First of all, these triggers on the bottom are perhaps the best triggers ever put on a video game controller, at least in my opinion. They are very springy. You know, there's no real click to them at any point. It just springs down. It can be argued as to whether that's better than the GameCube controller, but I'd say for certain applications, indeed most applications, this is preferable. And this allows for extremely fine control in racing games of the what's it called? The bloody acceleration and braking. It allows for a lot of trigger control on shooters, especially stuff like Halo, using something like the plasma pistol, where you just kind of hold it in the middle and just sort of flutter it. And that works because some shooting games, especially the semi-automatics, in order to slow you down, or in theory to slow you down, or to just provide a nicer feeling trigger pull, they don't actually activate like the moment you start pulling the trigger, or when the trigger bottoms out, but about halfway through. So it can feel really nice to just find that soft spot and just sort of flutter it. And that is something I found you can only really do on the 2 Xbox controllers. Once you get to the 360, it's a lot less possible. There's a lot less length of pull. It's a lot more pivot, like more of a heavy pivot, if that makes any sense. But yeah, so that's that. And yeah, so the triggers are really good. The sticks are also in a very good position. This is a controller that was designed for the new modern age of 3D games. Sorry, I'll just keep showing it to you properly. Because you can have your fingers firmly on these 2 triggers, these indented sort of triggers. There's no shoulder buttons. And also on both sticks. And that is a very important and revolutionary design feature. It had kind of already been done with the Dreamcast, but having these 2 sticks is... but I don't need to talk about offset sticks. That's a given Xbox versus Sony fanboy. Also, the D-pad, very accessible. They're not placed sort of like in quadrants like you get with PlayStation controllers. But, yeah, you can really easily move your finger between the two. Now, as I said before, where this controller completely breaks down is nothing to do with its bulk, although that is sizable. It is slightly awkwardly shaped, but that's not where it loses out. It is purely in the shape and placement of its 4 main buttons, in my opinion. Because if you take the later controller S, so here we go, and I'll try and show this the best I can with the camera as it is set up. Say you're playing a platformer, so a 3D platformer, or heaven forbid a fighting game. But we'll stick with a 3D platformer, and you'll have, most of the time, you'll have this hand on the stick, and then you'll have this finger working buttons, switching from buttons to camera, okay? And of course you won't be looking at your finger. Now with this you can feel very easily where all the buttons are. In one single hand placement, your thumb can be on the center of the buttons, and you can easily select what it is. See, I can close my eye and I can go up, and I can easily select what it is. And then you have, no, and this is a bad point in my head, they put the auxiliary buttons down here, but we'll get to that. You try and do the same thing with the Duke, especially not looking, when you're used to literally any other controller design since the NES, where everything since then had been put them in a proper pattern, like a geometric pattern or a linear pattern. This one, you know, if you're playing your platformer like I don't know, Blinks or something, you're using this finger to do the stick, but your thumb does not easily have a nice place to rest, and more importantly, move from camera to button. Because when you try and put your finger in the middle of these buttons, it's a bit ambiguous as to where the buttons are, especially moving from the stick to the buttons. So if I want to go for B, see, look, I just hit A there. I was just trying to hit B, because everything is clustered too close together, and instead of circular buttons, which we have had since the Atari, we've had the idea of a circular button since the Atari. If it's not a keypad, it's a circular button. They went with elliptical buttons, and I have that. It is not particularly I don't know, ergonomic. That makes sense. There's just too much vagueness going from the stick to the buttons, and that is the only real thing I can fault this controller with. Also, something which is unfortunate, this had a lot of, if they had stuck to their guns with a particular aspect of this controller, I think all controllers today would be better, and that is the 6 face button configuration. The idea of having 6 buttons on the face of the controller. Now, not sticking with this has dumbed down controls, because of course the PS2, I don't have a, well, I mean, I have a PS2 controller here, it's not a standard one by any means. See, a PS2 has 4 buttons, has a sticks in 2 quadrants down here, and it has its D-pad over here. I say quadrants, not quite quadrant, but you know what I mean. And there's more space for buttons here, at least with the ergonomic configuration of the PS2 model controller, there is space for more buttons. And if you had combined that 6 face buttons in a single configuration with shoulders and triggers, you would have what I think is the maximum, just the maximum controller. Nintendo were experimenting with that back in the N64. You see the old Ultra 64 prototype controllers that has 6 inline buttons instead of the C buttons being all different, which encouraged developers not to use them as 6 buttons, but instead as 2 and 4. And then you see here, it's blatantly obvious that these 2 are supposed to be auxiliary, because they're in a completely non-standard position. They've decided that these 2 are not supposed to be main function buttons anymore, which is a shame. Especially because it ruins the ergonomics of here. Because I know I think, you take a look at older Xbox games, and these two buttons do actually have important functions. I believe in Medal of Honor Rising Sun, that is grenade. That is a prime sort of function. But, yeah, but your thumb, you need to go from here, and you need to come down to the buttons. Again, there's that vagueness there, because the white and black. And it's just not as nice as having an entire array of buttons, because your thumb can definitely handle 6 buttons in a single configuration. But they went into the same kind of trap as Nintendo. They offset them, and thus they made them non-critical. And I think that is the final great problem with control design. And of course, just to quickly throw my 2 cents in... Actually, no, I won't. I'll do that in a different video. But this video isn't called What's Wrong with the Duke, it's called In Defense of the Duke. And I do believe that for first-person shooters and racing games, this is one of the best controllers out there, specifically the Duke. The Xbox controller system as a whole has a lot of things going for it. You've got the 256-degree analog pressure buttons, brilliant for sports games. You have, again, the triggers, yeah, like the sheer length of pull that you've never gotten with a PlayStation format controller, despite the fact that that is my preferred controller of choice. And, of course, the rumble. But for a first-person shooter, you have your fingers on your gun trigger, whatever they decide to use the secondary trigger for, be it a grenade or second weapon or something to that effect. You have your 6 buttons here. You've got your action, you've got your reload, you've got your change weapon, change secondary or action, jump, and all that sort of thing. I'm sure there's more generic features, but I can't do it. You know, click sticks for zoom and crouch and all that. And, of course, for any other utilities you have the D-pad. On a modern controller, a lot of those functions that I had to name there, these core functions, would have to go on the D-pad. Just because you can't map a lot of those things to the shoulders. But having that freedom of having all those basic functions on the front buttons in one configuration. Now, of course, as I said before, like I went into I do just realize I've just kind of contradicted myself, because I said all this time about how these buttons are useless on this particular control model, and said how having them there is good. I was more talking about Xbox in general, but having your thumb able to do all those in a web, even if it's difficult, is good. But those are things that you're going to have to do a lot less often than simply look, move, and shoot. So while having these buttons be better would be obviously a lot better, this controller is ultimately just perfect for that. And also, it is the best controller, as far as I've seen, of any console controller for racing games, because of this sheer tactile, ergonomic control you get of the throttle, of the brake. Because in a racing game, like, what are these buttons going to be? What, like, friggin' NOS, handbrake, that's about the only thing I can think of. I'm sure there's other things, maybe interact with the world. Those are really situational. And yeah, NOS and handbrake, it would be nice to have shoulders. That's true. So a PS2 controller might win for your more street racer games. But for sim races, this thing is definitely the way to go. But yeah, so that is my defense of the Duke. And of course, they've remade the Duke as a PC and Xbox One controller. You see, for that to work, they would need to get those triggers right for me. But of course, what stops it from being useful for a platformer game, for maybe an open world game, and heaven forbid a fighting game? This is absolutely, as I said before, useless for a fighting game. Because like, even though like having can you imagine like Street Fighter having just a 6-button thumb layout there? That would be absolutely awesome for the average 6-button fighting game. But of course, because they got rid of these 2 extra buttons, you see here, they went back to just 4 buttons, and they put the extra 2 buttons on the bumpers. And they didn't replace them with anything. Look, they could have put 2 more buttons down here, shifted around a bit, put 2 more down here, but they didn't. But yeah, so I will always have a fondness for the Duke for certain games. It's just more relaxing to use in those games because it feels more solid for a racing game or a shooter, because those triggers, they just sit so much better, and it's a more solid controller, which makes you more relaxed. A PS2 controller, very useful, very user-friendly in my opinion. Some would argue. I'd say fair arguments. But PS2 controller has a lot of good things going for it. It's a very versatile controller. This controller is a specialized controller. Ultimately, it's a failure, but I think that the only reason you can really fault it is not anything to do with its size. Unless you have really small hands, but yeah, so looking at you, Trump. But yeah, so is the buttons. Why were they elliptical? Even if they were circular, they could have gotten away with it, but elliptical is just, they're just not tactile enough. But anyway, I've rabbited on for way too long about that, but it's an opinion I have. Like, if you'd like me to hear my thoughts on any other game system controllers, what do I have here as standard stuff? I've got the 360, PS3, PS2, DualShock, Dual Analog, N64, yeah, I can review any of those if you want. What are you guys' thoughts on the Duke? The old Duke controller. Do you absolutely hate it, or do you think everyone, including me, who sees downsides in it, is an idiot? Please let me know. But this video's going on long enough. Tomorrow, hopefully the VEDA will be a live stream. Hopefully. I can't 100% confirm it. Then after that, on Monday, we will be having the what's it called? Friggin' weekly pickups. There we go. Now the weekly pickups, just for me getting through it. I'm gonna just do it in this format again, no editing. Also, hopefully some Let's Play content coming up in the next week, just some party style Let's Play content with some of my friends. But yeah, you're gonna want to see this week's and next week's pickups, because I actually ordered something today that I've wanted for quite a while. I've been combing eBay trying to get it cheap, but it's just not being cheap. But it's a really expensive game. Okay, and here's how you know how excited I was to have this game in my collection that I've just ordered from CEX. So you heard of my rules about spending money with games, and also I have heaps of voucher with CEX. So basically, because of the stuff I trade in, I can get just about whatever I want for under half the sticker price because of the trade-in. This is a game that cost me $11 to order with shipping, and rather than take the minute to look up my vouchers and type them in and get it for half price, I decided to, as quickly as I possibly could, click through and just pay PayPal the full price. I have never done that with a game on CEX before. I always try and save what I can. So that lets you know how excited I am to have this game. That won't be in this week's one because it's not time for it to ship, but will be in next week. So we're gonna have some good stuff on both weeks. So I will see you guys hopefully tomorrow on the live stream. Please let me know if you reckon you might be on, or in the comments watching it later. And I will see you guys next. Oh, if there's a kind of game you want to see me play in the live stream, let me know. Yeah, I've got a decent example of just about any given genre. So yeah. Anyway, see you guys tomorrow.